Then Boaz buys the land, marries Ruth, and the two of them conceive a child. And this child goes on to be the grandfather of David, King David. David who slays David and Goliath. And of course, from the lineage of David, where do we get? We get Jesus. You notice here, where were they coming? Where was Elimelech coming from? Bethlehem, which is where what? Jesus ends up being born. And so you see throughout these three people, through Naomi's faithfulness to God and wanting to be obedient to God, she is a blessing to Ruth and Boaz, and she's a blessing to Boaz as well. She tells Ruth what Ruth needs to do in order to show Boaz that she wants to be married. Boaz, in being a godly man and doing the things that godly men do, becomes a blessing to both Ruth and Naomi. Ruth, being a godly woman, being loyal to Naomi, being obedient to her, being obedient to the law of God, being a hard worker out in the field, becomes a blessing to both Naomi and to Boaz, giving him a son, continuing on this legacy. And of course, all of them end up being a blessing for who? For the nation of Israel, because from their child eventually comes David, who becomes the king of Israel. And of course, then from there, what happens? David's line continues on. From the line of David comes Jesus, and Jesus ends up becoming a blessing for the entire world, for all of us. And so in the book of Judges, we saw what God could do with people when they were not faithful to the law. But in the book of Ruth, we see what God will do when people are obedient to Him. God will do so much when you obey Him, when you strive to be obedient to the law, that even in the midst of great tragedy, and the great tragedy of losing their spouse and losing their husbands, God still blesses Naomi. Naomi ends up with her rest, with her security, and with her line continuing on, with her grandson now, who eventually from his grandson will be king. And then so from there is, of course, the eternal king, Jesus Christ, which relates back to what? To her late husband's name. God is king. And so when God's people are obedient to God, when God's people live in faith, even in the midst of struggle, even in the midst of tragedy, blessings abound, because God uses godly people to bless other people. God desires to use you to be a blessing to somebody else.